former minister and founder of Something or Other Publishing, Wade Franson, is the host of Created in the Image of God, a series that examines the role of religion in society, from messianic returns to the emotive responses transmitted through our culture. Wade fearlessly addresses reality claims from all directions, objectively exploring their compatibility with Holy Scripture. Joining him is Daniel Sanderson, CEO of Planksiv, an international philosophy and cultural media outlet, helping emerging thought leaders with personal branding by co-creating organic content. Tonight's Spotlight Show: Islamism, with Emery Waters.
Welcome, everybody. Tonight's another episode, and it's a very interesting episode. It's on Islamism versus Islam, and we're trying something new in today's show. We are going to be releasing some pre-recorded interviews, and we do have the luxury of having Anne-Marie in studio live, as well as some earlier pre-recorded footage. So we're excited to share that with you guys tonight. Anne-Marie is a British politician and SOOP author with 2 best-selling books to her credit. Waters was born and raised in Dublin, Ireland, and went to a school in Stoneybatter in the city's Northside. She studied journalism at the Nottingham Trent University in England, graduated in 2003, and gained a law degree in London. After a decade in the Labour Party, Waters joined the UK Independence Party, UKIP. She launched Sharia Watch UK, and in April 2014, Waters left UKIP to form and lead the For Britain Party from 2018 until its dissolution in 2022. Anne-Marie is currently taking a break from politics to focus on her writing. Anne-Marie has called out negative, destructive elements of what she calls Islamism. For daring to do so, she has been branded an extreme right Islamophobe. Something or Other Publishing, a sponsor of this show, published her book Beyond Terror: Islam's Slow Erosion of Western Democracy in July of 2018. I want to share with you now this interview.
The way I wanted to start is with the show's main thesis, which is the role of religion in society. What are your thoughts about religion in society? Do you sway one way or another?
I do. I'm a secularist, very much. People are entitled to beliefs, but they should, it's got to be kept private. And I was watching the interview with the Imam yesterday, and he was talking a lot about interpretation and how various things can be interpreted differently. That to me makes an argument for secularism. If you don't know what it's saying, then how can you legislate on it? We should be legislating on objectivity and on science and on truth. And there is such a thing as objective truth, and we should be legislating on those grounds only. I think we have an innate compassion, an innate sense of justice and right and wrong, which we don't need religion for. In fact, the very fact that we pick from religions in accordance with what we believe is right and wrong is proof that there is an innate sense of right and wrong within the human being that we don't need scripture for.
To just level set. So the show that we're doing seeks to take to heart your words that you spoke to me a few days ago when I asked, what's going on with your life? And you said something like, I'm so glad that I'm no longer in a situation where people are taking my words and telling me what they mean.
The truth, Wade. This is the truth.
I
is
agree.
The truth. If I get a tattoo in my life, which I might just do, it would probably say the truth is true, no matter what. And
I agree.
You can sometimes, if someone insists that it's not true, and I insist that it is, then I don't know where you go from there. And if telling the truth is lobbing a grenade, then I should just stay in the bunker and not say anything, because I'm going to say what's true. Regardless of whether it's a grenade or not, I can say it politely. But it's the truth that upsets people, not how you say it.
That's all we're asking, is that you say it politely.
Okay.
We're not going to air that. You can quote the Quran for sure. Absolutely. Right? just if I have Christians and Muslims on, we're not going to talk about whether Jesus is God or not. That's a theological argument that is pointless in that discussion. Follow me? The Muslims say he's not God. The Christians say he is God. I'm not going to have that discussion at all. I don't care what you think about Muhammad personally or the historical details that you may or may not find or agree with or put forward about Muhammad versus his historical details. You follow me? I just don't want to get into that. But anything else, I don't know, can avoid the excess lobbing of hand grenades.
Genital mutilation and also the head coverings. Are those the two main things that pop out in your mind as the non sequiturs, the non-starters?
No, they're among them. They're not the main reasons. I come at this from a few different perspectives. I come at it as a woman. I come at it as a lawyer. And I come at it as someone who is proudly British. Are you asking me that how we integrate FGM and workers into British society? My answer to that is we shouldn't.
Mm.
And I come at that as both a woman and as a British person. We should not. There is no reason for us to integrate these things into our society. Most British people think that abusing the body of a young girl like that is abhorrent and should be met with a jail sentence. I agree with that. But I would also say that such people who insist on living according to practicing things like that shouldn't be here at all. If you want to live, and it took me some time to get here, and this is why people don't like me anymore, I'd come to the conclusion that if you want to live like that, if you want to wear a black blanket over your head, if you want to mutilate your daughters, God bless them. I wish them all the luck in the world. Don't do it in Britain. It's not British. And that's my perspective of wanting to protect culture. I know it is changing rapidly. We have FGM clinics in this country, clinics dedicated to the physical repair of FGM. We didn't have that 20 years ago. Now it's part of British life. FGM is part of British life. There are parts of our capital, London, where it looks like you're in Bangladesh. People walking around, vast crowds of them wearing black covers over their faces. I don't want that in my country. And that's the start. That's where I come from. I wish it was one of the world was like that, but we can't do that. I can't go to Bangladesh and change who they are. I can't go to Saudi Arabia and change who they are. I wish it would change for them because I feel sorry for the people who live in it. But what my concern is, that's now becoming a feature in my life, in my world. And it is perfectly legitimate for, yes, I'm going to say it, white British people to object from a white British point of view. We are always, the sort of underlying narrative seems to be that the white European can't have a perspective from a white European point of view. Yes, we can, and it's perfectly legitimate. And Europe is transforming beyond recognition because of immigration from societies with cultures which are completely incompatible with ours. And we, the native white European, is being told to shut up, stay quiet, and allow your country to be dismantled and to allow practices to take place which are against the law as well. FGM is against the law in Britain, but we've set up clinics to accommodate it. We are accommodating crime. It is against the law to cover your face in a bank, for example, in this country. Guess who doesn't have it, who that law doesn't apply to? Our country is being destroyed by this. Europe is being destroyed by this. So is Canada, by the way.
So I want to get a little straight in my head about this. Are you saying that they have clinics to actually do this?
No, to repair it.
To repair it. Okay. Yeah.
But it's a crime. And nobody is looking into it. But if you've got clinics with people who are mutilated coming for repair, not repair, but if something goes wrong and they're injured, you have clinics assigned the duty of dealing with the aftermath, the physical aftermath of FGM. Now, what my question is, if you know these people they're coming into the clinic, so you know who they are, why aren't you investigating for a criminal offense? But they're not. That all may as well not be there. They're just repairing these. I'm not saying they shouldn't repair them. I'm saying that you have crime in front of you has been committed. Investigate it. We have laws in this country to protect children from abuse. They're never used to take children out of FGM situations, ever. FGM is becoming slowly but surely a part of Britain. And that's because of immigration and multiculturalism. Neither should happen in this country any longer.
So would you say that happens on British soil?
Of course.
Okay, honestly, I didn't know. And
100%. There are FGM parties in this country where they all get together and mutilate several girls at once and have a party. That happens in this country. We know it happens in this country. It happens in huge numbers in this country. It's a criminal offense supposed to carry a 14-year prison sentence. Nothing whatsoever is done. And nothing is done because if you dare to even speak about it, the left wing will call you a racist. And everyone is terrified of being called a racist. So you have this silence, this terrified silence. Laws are being broken and children are being mutilated. And we just sit back and let it happen. If you speak, as I have, you'll have your life destroyed.
do you feel that your life has been destroyed as?
But only because my reputation is destroyed. I'm a lawyer. I can't work as a lawyer. No one would hire me to work as a lawyer. So there are most jobs I wouldn't be able to do. So my ability to make a living has been seriously impaired, simply for telling the truth and simply for having an opinion. My life could be destroyed completely if I let it. I'm very much you're responsible for your own life person. So if my life is not, I'm actually happy. I have a really wonderful life, but only because I made it that way. If I were, weaker, I could have been completely destroyed by it. Yeah.
So what kind of law do you practice?
I did family law. It's a long time ago, but this is actually what brought me into it, because there are Sharia councils in this country which operate Sharia law, Sharia family law. And this is how I got into this in the first place. As a lawyer in studying family law, I discovered, because up until then, I naively didn't know. I thought this is the country of the suffragettes. We would never tolerate the Sharia treatment of women in this country, and we do. And it's all completely illegal, but that doesn't matter. And that's how I got into this. I discovered tribunals in this country litigating on family, divorce, child custody, domestic violence, which is criminal offence. And we have Iran-style Sharia operating in the UK. The government knows about it, politicians know about it, the press know about it.
Would you say that the actual, the laws are being eroded in your court systems?
I don't think they are being eroded, but in practical, they're being ignored. We have, legally here, you are allowed private arbitration. So if a group of people want to privately arbitrate on an issue, so say you have a contract dispute, you can appoint an arbitrator. Under law, I have no problem with this. It saves the courts time and money, etc., which is the point of it. So you have private arbitration, and what two parties to a dispute can do is appoint a sort of pseudo judge. They will agree to act in accordance with the ruling of this pseudo judge. Private arbitration. It's perfectly fine. It's perfectly legal. However, the law that allows private arbitration to take place has rules. So you can only do private arbitration if. So you have to be in compliance with the overriding Human Rights Act, for example, which both parties should be treated equally. That's number one. So with Sharia arbitration, the woman is worth less than a man. She is worth half. If she is to give testimony, she has to find someone to back up her testimony, or he is believed. And remember that most of this is family law, so it's usually man against woman. So her testimony means nothing compared to his. That is illegal even under the Arbitration Act, which allows private arbitration to take place. Are you with me?
That's a great example.
The Arbitration Act allows arbitration, but only under a certain set of rules. One of those set of rules is that both parties have the same rights, the same legal weights, and all of it is subject to the Human Rights Act. Sharia arbitration just stamps all over the Human Rights Act, doesn't adhere at all to the requirements of the Arbitration Act. So it is acting unlawfully in its arbitration, but nobody does anything. Now, you have to understand, this is not some hidden in the basement thing. Mm-hmm. They are open. They look like courts. They have Sharia judges sitting up on a little dais looking down on everyone. They operate like courts. They have signs outside. This is not hidden. They don't hide it. But the rulings inside it are completely illegal. Their arbitration is completely illegal. They do it laughing at British establishment because they know the British establishment knows what they're doing is illegal, but won't stop them. In order to prevent something happening, you have to stop people from doing it. They will do it. Someone has to step in to stop them, or else it carries on. That's where we are. They know nobody's going to stop it, so they carry on, and nobody stops it. So you end up with a Sharia system in Great Britain.
Wow. Okay. I want to move it beyond the borders of Great Britain just for a minute, because we know this type of thing happens around the world and in Islamic countries and states where, say, for example, Sharia law is basically like the mainstay of law. What you've described to me is a complete violation of individual rights and freedoms. And from Wade's perspective, that this is even prophetic. Okay, now just bear with me a little bit because I know we're both from a secular standpoint. But what's really interesting is that from Wade's perspective, and he'll be able to clear this up as well, but from Wade's perspective, this is evidence that we will be used against us in the coming years and in the future. We will look at these rules and we will judge ourselves by our actions and inactions. So the reason why I'm saying this is that if we take this outside of the borders of Britain and the UK and Europe, and we look at this happening around the world, what is our obligation as a global citizen to stomp this out? It seems to me like you draw the line from a nationalistic standpoint and from a cultural identity standpoint, which you're proud to declare, but you're not saying that we need to eradicate it around the world, probably because it's just too overwhelming. Would that be fair?
Can't we? How do you eradicate it around the world?
Hey, everyone. So we wanted to give you, at the beginning of the show, a bit of speed view into Anne-Marie Waters, who is up in the UK at 2 a.m. to be on the show, and who, not knowing the length of the pre-recorded video, has just gone to get another cup of coffee. In the meantime, Dan, you want to take that ticker tape down? This is now live. So we've got with us in the studio another guest, and we've been having some technical difficulties here behind the scene, but now we're ready. So John, can you hear us?
Yes. Hello there. Can you hear me?
Perfect. So we will be back with Anne-Marie live in just a few minutes, but in the meantime, I'd like to introduce John, who was slated to be on a little bit later in the show. And I'd like to invite John to personally tell us of his background and in his own words, because as you heard Anne-Marie say, she's glad that people are no longer asking her a question and then telling her what she thinks or telling her what she meant. Similarly, John has a very unique background, one that he wants to carefully present in the context of this show so that his purpose and his role on this show is not misinterpreted. So I'll just let you go with it, John.
Looks like there's dinner being delivered.
Right on time.
That looked great.
I was actually sorry about this. I was grilling for myself and my wife, but it turned out at the best time. It all works. So I come from an interesting perspective because of my heritage, but that shouldn't be, I think, a reason for someone to be credible or not. Nonetheless, a lot of people operate that way, although I disagree with it. I think it's prejudicial to base off of one's heritage, or for example, the color of their skin or ethnicity, what is it? But that's how our society is working right now. So as a matter of placating the curious mind, I come from an interesting heritage of Middle Eastern on my mom's side and, on my father's side, white. So there's a melding of two worlds, a mixing of two cultures, very different. The East and the West, they meet and they made me. And when you think about Middle East, there's a very safe go-to. It's very likely it's a Muslim country. So a country that the predominant religion and probably the legal system is based off of Islamic theology. So in the case of my mom's family, they came from Iran. Why are we not there? Because we don't feel welcome there. And long story short, a lot of people, a minority of people, but a very large portion of the population in Iran, they have had the systematic persecution on the basis of their religion, on their faith, meaning they don't have the freedom of thought. So if in the country of Iran, you are believing in a mentality or an idea that goes against the common norm, you are systematically rooted out, denied education opportunities, and depending on if there's the equivalent of a pogrom or some kind of mob that comes together, you may be fearing for your life, literally, without the rule of law stopping you from being killed or disappearing forever. So it's a real issue in the country of Iran. People who, it doesn't matter if you're a Jew or a Christian or a Baha'i, the largest religious minority in Iran is the Baha'i faith. You are subject to a lot of difficulties. Like if you go to Afghanistan right now, and I want to bring my wife with me, she would not be free to go into that country, though she came from an Islamic country where a lot of people are practicing Islam, and a lot of the rules and laws are based in Islamic doctrine. So I think that from the idea of culture, the idea of where you come from, definitely there's a lot that you're exposed to in your environment. So in the West, a lot of people have seen our cultural dress as a positive thing, as sharing your ideas and virtues and ideals. Sharing something beautiful, like we're all flowers of one garden. That's a concept that I believe in my religion, that there's this concept of unity and diversity. Very beautiful. The difficulty happens when someone wants to force unity and conformity. When someone says that because you're a woman in my culture, I'm going to force you to wear something. That then becomes a systematic symbol of oppression. So it's not just one person making a random act.
Yep.
It's systematic.
Awesome. So John, thank you so much. I really appreciate you level setting and showing why we want you on the show. But I think this is a perfect segue, seeing that Anne-Marie has now recaffeinated herself, to kind of flip back over. And what I want to do at this point in the show is reintroduce you, Anne-Marie, in the context of when I first met you, which is back in 2016, 2017, whenever that was, when we started talking about the need to get your book out. And what I recall is meeting a person who was very passionate about compassion for those who were being mistreated and underserved. And what I want to do is ask you to share what, just in a brief couple of words, keeping this segment short because there's so much we got to get to, but the original reason why you began addressing this particular topic.
Yeah, I was studying law at the time, and I made friends with a young woman on my law class when I was in law school, and she was a practicing Muslim, and I was sort of naive about. I didn't really know anything about Islam at the time. I was young and enjoying myself and not taking life incredibly seriously, I suppose. But she told me, she was British born, and she told me some things about her family, very casually, very matter-of-factly, about the pressures she faced. Her sister was on the run. Her sister had left her husband, and her brothers were trying to find her sister. And she was very matter-of-factly telling me if they find her, they'll kill her. And I kind of got an insight into this that I didn't know this was happening in the UK. I didn't know. And to her, it seemed perfectly normal. Even, it's not as if she had just arrived. She was born in Britain. And yet still, having born and grown up in Britain, she still sort of thought it was normal for brothers to threaten to kill their sister for leaving a marriage. That brought me into looking into Sharia councils because I was studying family law. I discovered the existence of Sharia councils in the UK. That brought me into looking at Islam. I read the Quran. I studied not all of the hadiths, or too many of them. And I was appalled and shocked at what I saw, and I couldn't believe that we in Great Britain were tolerating this sort of treatment of particularly young women in Great Britain. I thought we had. Again, I was naive. I was young and naive, I think, and I was it that. When are we talking here? I think we're in 2005. So it's
Well, and
probably
the naivete,
ago.
the
So I was
naivete, the naivete that you referred to,
Mhm.
is that regarding the reaction that would result from this? In other words,
Oh, yeah.
when I look at this, I'm thinking an unholy alliance, right, between those who proclaim the same, I don't know what else to call them, liberal values that you were addressing,
Mm.
and those who are diametrically opposed to many of those liberal values joining forces to attack you.
Yeah, I've since kind of learned a little bit more about why that is. I think the people who, if you talk about, if for simplicity's sake, if we talk about the left and the right, the left absolutely went for me when I started talking about this stuff publicly. They try to destroy your life. They really do. And yet they are the ones who talk about gender equality, and they're the ones who talk about racial equality. And when I said, but we shouldn't be tolerating the genital mutilation of little Somali girls, we wouldn't tolerate it for little white girls, why are we tolerating it for little Somali girls? I was called a racist by the very people who are tolerating it for Somali girls when they wouldn't tolerate it. Everything was upside down. So, but I've since discovered that any minority will be sided with by the left against the majority, because they are engaged in a cultural Marxist destruction of Western society. That I've discovered that since, but I was naive at the time.
And on that note, we're going to go to a quick commercial break, which in this case is a video promoting your book, Beyond Terror: Islam's Slow Erosion of Western Democracy. And we want to announce before we play this that you'll be able to pick your favorite comment or question from this evening's guests, which can be seen on the right if you click on the little, I think, chat icon. And we'll be giving a free copy of your book to the comment of your choice. So let's go ahead and producer, roll that ad right now. And we'll be back then to talk. So thank you, Anne-Marie, for writing that book. And the guest who produces the comment or question that you like the best will get a free copy, compliments of Something or Other Publishing. I want to now go back to comments that I made in that pre-recorded interview, and then ask a really broad question to level set where we're at in history, broadly speaking. My comments were that, look, this show is not going to be about the theological differences between Islam and Christianity, for example, or any other religion. The purpose of this show is not to elevate one religion over another. The purpose of this show is to discuss the appropriate role of religion in society from a variety of perspectives. And you shared your perspective on what that is. So we're not here to discuss, the supremacy of Christianity over Islam. That's so not the point of this, or any of the theology behind it, but rather the impact on society, and as you've mentioned, on law. So I want to go back now into history, and I want to raise a concept that is probably going to sound very racist when I bring it up. But I'd like to ask you, as a British citizen who may have more familiarity with the historical context of this term than Americans, and I want to talk a little bit about how this concept may have led to the type of society that we see in Britain and other Western nations, particularly those established by white people. The term is the white man's burden, right? The white man's burden. I'm sure you're familiar with this, and I'm sorry for just springing it on you with no context.
You're going to have to explain it to me a little bit.
All right. So my understanding of the white man's burden, and perhaps somebody from our audience can comment on this, and I'll throw John back in the mix here, and even Daniel, in case one of them have something to add to this question. The white man's burden, as I understand it, was a recognition on the part of the British people in particular that they had achieved through the Industrial Revolution a degree of material success that elevated them above other nations. And yes, there was perhaps some jingoism mixed in with that. Yes, there was perhaps some racial superiority mixed in with that. Yes, there was perhaps some belief in the superiority of their systems, their culture, their laws, their legal system, right? The foundations of their society, the structure of their civilization, they felt had elevated them to a level of success that exceeded that of other nations. And they felt a sense of responsibility to go out and help the other nations. Thus, the white man's burden, the burden that they felt to help share the success of their civilization with others. In a sense, I believe that there was altruism behind this, but it is viewed, of course, in the historical context today as being an incredibly racist, racial superiority kind of thing, when in fact, in my view, it was an attempt to find out how can we best serve other nations. Daniel, John, any familiarity you have with this context or this concept, and anything you can add to it?
I do, but John, go ahead if you want to take a run at it first.
Well, some people criticize that it happens today, just transformed into other names. And I mean,
right, they call it paternalism today, or other things, right?
Yeah, or some people being called a white knight, for example, coming in to save the day because somehow people need saving. So I feel criticism for everything, but there definitely was in the context of the imperialism of the past a genuine direction of God, glory, and gold. So the idea is you bring God, you make glory, and you take the gold. That's the idea of how it was since the conquistadors, the Spanish, went and conquered the New World at the time, when they conquered other peoples. So this is not a new concept. Actually, if anything, this concept is very ancient and not unique to the idea, I think, of one nation or one ethnicity being the white man's burden. I think that if you go to Genghis Khan, the Mongolians, they had the similar idea that they were taking their superiority to the whole world.
John, have you actually studied into the literature and the thesis that was created at the time of this concept? I personally believe
the idea was that everyone is a savage, and that the civilization of the West will take this, again, civilization of the West will be taken through the people who have it and enforced on people who don't, making them to live their way. So, for example, in Canada, until even the turn of the last millennium, we're talking the 2000s, you still had this feeling towards the natives of Canada. You had extreme racism that was applied to the native peoples of Canada, where they weren't even given basic sustenance because of their inferiority. And those who were forced into the schools were forced to completely divorce from their cultures and just do exactly what was considered civilized. So you definitely have, across cultures around the world, an idea that there's one way to do it, and whatever you're coming from is not important. What we're giving you is the best and the only way you're going to do things. And you still see that with the British system today. If you have heard of the International Baccalaureate program, it's considered an international school for diplomats that children around the world can partake in public schools. The idea is that there's a British system of education, and you're going to go to this standard, and this standard is going to be held for you to grow to that standard and meet that standard. And depending on how you use it, there is a positive sense of trying to meet a standard for education, but it's only positive where it is welcome and desired. Whereas if it is forced on a culture or a people that don't want it, then it's not so. So that's where
So let me stop you there, because I think that's a good place to end. You actually took it in kind of the opposite direction I was expecting and I was inviting, which is fine. My perspective in bringing this up is that the intent of the people who formulated this theory, just like many things, was, in my opinion, positive. And I'm sure everyone will now call me a racist for saying this, but the intent was to reach out and help other people. That's my opinion from having read the literature of the time and what they were trying to do. It was not a gold grab at all in terms of how it was formulated and why it was done. The excesses of what occurred is another matter, but that's nothing new. But Dan, did you have a perspective on this?
Yeah, I agree with that, Wade. And the best intentions can have a way of going sideways or being misinterpreted through future generations. And I think, for example, the U.S. Declaration of Independence, I think this and other founding documents from the founding fathers of the United States were so very well planned. They have that right balance of ambiguity and freedom within the words and the laws for it to, and so it's difficult because, history can paint a picture with this. Anne-Marie mentioned earlier in the thing and characterized it under an umbrella of a Marxist ideology. And I know I'm kind of mixing things here, but I do get that. I get how things can be turned for their own manipulative ways.
So let me jump back in because I really want to get to Anne-Marie. I was just trying to actually set a stage for you, Anne-Marie. And I appreciate the different perspectives here. And that's why we love having them on the show, because it takes us to places where I, as the main, host of the show, don't even expect. But where I was going with this is when you mentioned, those who seek to elevate women's rights actually now acting in opposition is really, in my opinion, what John described. The intentions of the Labour Party, going back decades, might have been to, work for the common man, elevate them, give everyone a fair shot. But it's morphed into something different today, is what I'm hearing from you. And the original intentions of even British colonialism might have been to bring elevation and opportunity and material benefits to those who, frankly, there were many countries where disease and all kinds of issues were more prevalent than what England had managed to overcome. So I was trying to set that kind of stage to get your perspective on where, why we are in that situation today where, as you call it, the left is promoting those values and views that actually degrade women in this context.
Women are secondary to them is the only conclusion I can come to. So women are sort of collateral damage. If they're destroying the rights of women, that's okay, because their greater aim is the destruction of capitalism, essentially. And they will do anything. They will align themselves with people with completely opposing views to what they pretend to hold, if it means the attacking capitalism. That is what I've discovered over the years is their true aim. Might some people be altruistic? Yes. I think they do. I think they are. But I've had so many occasions when I've explained to people, on the very rare occasion when they listen, and you say to them, look, hear what I'm telling you. In Great Britain today, young Somali girls are having their genitals mutilated. If we speak against it, you call us racists. My perspective is, I'm telling you in plain English, I want Somali girls to have the same protection from mutilation that white girls do. You don't. You're saying we ought to allow it in the name of multiculturalism, and yet you are calling me a racist. You have decided to sacrifice a certain demographic of girls in the name of allowing multiculturalism to be practiced in the UK. I sit people down and say this.
And how far do you get? How
You're a
far do you
racist.
get?
You're a
How far
racist.
how far do you get in terms of making them aware of the cognitive
No.
dissonance of the words that they're uttering?
You can't. You can't. It's about you can't. I mean, people are too afraid to agree with me in public. So we've got a sort of an Orwellian 2 minutes hate thing. If anyone dares to dissent, even with a facial expression, they will be subject to verbal battery. You're a racist, you're a racist, you're a racist. You must understand, in the UK, you cannot be called a racist. It's life destroying just to be called it. You don't have to be it. You only have to be called it. So people are terrified of that. So in one sense, they won't listen because they know who I am. They think I'm a racist, and so everything I say isn't legitimate anyway. They're afraid to agree with me in case they get called a racist. And they're so wired into this anti-capitalist left-wing propaganda that what I say doesn't penetrate anyway. So it's very difficult to have a conversation with people when facts are inadmissible, when the truth and the argument, as you're explaining it, isn't being heard. It's very difficult to
Could
debate.
you share with us what's written on your coffee cup?
Yes, it is, "In a time of universal deceit, telling the truth is a revolutionary act." That's a George Orwell quote. I'm a very big fan of George Orwell. Very big fan. His books, by the way, are now considered far right by the British government. They've got a prevent scheme, which is, again, it's named quite well actually, because its intention, it was set off to stop people thinking the wrong things. So if you think the wrong things and you express them, you will you'll come under the umbrella of the prevent scheme, which is to intervene and correct your thinking. And if you think I'm those words, correct your thinking, is actually what they use. The police arrive at people's doors to correct their thinking in Britain today. And George Orwell's works are now considered a red flag for extremism.
I mean,
I remember-
if you think about it, though, that this was how it was for the past century with the British. Even, like, I don't know how long, maybe centuries with the British. It's the same culture that's now being used against itself. So you have this idea of that very same superiority that's applied now, and it's being used against the very same people that hypothetically were, again, using that on all the people around the world. So the colonies, they were, most of them, plundered and pillaged for resources. Although, yes, you may have built there may have been a railroad and a railroad station and a factory, but those things were all used specifically in the most efficient way possible to obtain the resources to ship it back to the home colony, which would be, in this case, the United Kingdom. Not that it's good or bad, but that's just what was happening. So if you consider the modern day, you have a whole nother story now. Now we're even able to talk about the idea of the legitimacy of a sovereign government and not be put in jail for talking about it. Back then, it used to be treasonous to even talk about things that was against the state. Now you can see, and I was appalled by this, in the middle of England, where London, just London area, you have people walking in the streets and saying death to their country that they're in. I mean, I cannot imagine going to Iran or going to any country in the Middle East and saying that death to the king or to the government. You'd be not just thrown in jail, you may be shot on the spot. I mean, who knows? I'm not very fond of the idea of trying the experiment. So I have a question for you, if I may, and this kind of draws things to the present day. Why is it that we have this double standard of the realization of how bad it is to live in those countries, which is why people are coming to the West, and this double standard of saying, okay, well, it's bad over there and we can accept it here and normalize it here? How do we get past that double standard of normalization of what is otherwise against our laws in this country?
I'm not sure what the question is. How do we?
I have to say, it happens to me a lot too, John. I do that. Let's concise it. Let's consult for a minute, John. What do you think the pinpoint question is on that?
So we're very clear that this idea of moral relativism is a thing among people, believing that to each his own, let the cultures be and coexist and so forth. But then at the same time, you have cultures not merely to each his own, acting in a let's say positive way, but you have cultures where people that are now citizens of the state are hurting each other in that context of to each his own. So yes, you have a culture that's now in the country that may not be, for example, harming people outside of their culture, but they're harming the people that are born as citizens of the state. So in Florida, for example, I'll tell you, my child is prop the government, and that, it's just that way. Parents don't really have ownership of their children. The government owns the children in Florida. So if I am a bad father, the children are going to be taken away. The state will take the children because I'm not fit to take care of them. That's just how it works. You go to Britain, the same thing. If someone is in a vegetative state, the state may make a decision to pull the plug on the person. So if the state has so much power to take children away, to take people in a vegetative state out of their life and no longer have the situation of being prolonged, why is it that the state doesn't get involved when someone's genitals are being mutilated? Why is it the state doesn't get involved when someone doesn't want to go home because they're afraid their father will beat them for not wearing a hijab? Why is that?
Okay, because they will be. I mean, I'm not trying to make this. I'm not trying to be flippant about it, but they're afraid to. If you bring it down to the practical level, so if a social worker or a doctor or a nurse sees a young Somali girl, for example, most of our FGM cases, to keep it on FGM, involve Somalis. If they see her being damaged, they're afraid to say anything. The police are afraid to investigate it. The medical people are afraid to report it. The politicians are afraid to speak up about it. And they're all afraid of this because they're all afraid of being called racist. And I'm not trying to be casual or dismissive of it. That is genuinely the truth. In practice, that's how it works. Nobody does anything because everyone's too afraid of being called a racist. And that word just dominates public life in this country. Everyone is terrified of it because it is life-destroying to be accused of racism. I think I get what you mean about the moral relativism. So we've got this live and let live philosophy, but that live and let live has now met with people who harm each other. And we have now decided as a society, well, they may be harming each other, but that's their culture, so let them be. So that means that we have no morals. We have no objective moral position. We either it's wrong or it's not. So if it's wrong to mutilate your daughter, then it's wrong across the board. That's my position. But multiculturalism, and yes, it derived from a kind of a Marxism that people can be divided into groups. You have the oppressed and you have the oppressor. We as whites are the oppressor. That's a given. And anyone who isn't white is the oppressed. That's also a given. So anyone who isn't white can do whatever they want. And if white people try to stop them, that's colonialism. That's white supremacy. That's white people stepping in and imposing our values onto non-white people. That's how it's perceived. And that's why people don't.
So this is a good point to segue. We're going to do a commercial break, and then we're going to actually come back with the next pre-recorded segment in which we were asking you about the UN. It's a much shorter segment. It's like 4 minutes. And then we'll come back and talk about one of the basic premises of this show, Created in the Image of God, the role of religion in society, which is that the role of religion is to inspire and not coerce. But this role has historically and repeatedly failed when the adherents of any religion become zealots and then begin to impose and coerce those around them and try to force them to adopt the same beliefs. And where we're emerging as a society and civilization in today's world, we're at a unique crossroads in human history. So I'd like to then quickly go to a commercial break, and when we come back, we'll play that clip and we'll then talk about that.
What do divorce, kidnapping, ancient prophecies, and the collapse of the Soviet Union have in common with the music of the Beatles? These are all elements of author Wade Franson's traumatic autobiographical journey, recorded in his best-selling book, The People of the Sign. He effortlessly weaves these elements together, proving once and for all that truth really is far, far stranger than fiction. Order your copy now on Amazon, or by emailing orders at soopllc.com.
I believe in nation states. I believe in nation states because, first of all, some of them are like this one is very old, and you can't just wipe it out. People have emotional attachments to their nation. I certainly do. And my answer to I really wish that we could make things different in countries like Saudi Arabia or Pakistan. I just don't see how we can. However, a starting point might be the United Nations could do or practice what it preaches. The United Nations has a list of human rights, inalienable human rights, but it allows Saudi Arabia, which doesn't respect those in any way, shape, or form, to sit on its bodies. If you really believe in those rights, then Saudi Arabia shouldn't even be in the UN, much less sitting on a human rights council. They put Iran on a women's rights council. It's absurd. So they don't believe in it, obviously. I don't think those countries should be allowed anywhere near the United Nations if it believed in what it says it believes. They should cut off. If you take South Africa during apartheid, for example, it was absolutely isolated, wasn't even allowed to take part in sporting contests. Why then, when women are treated as they are in Saudi Arabia, why is Saudi Arabia not banned from sporting contests for its treatment of its people? Why is Iran not banned? Why were both of those countries in the World Cup recently when their human rights records are abhorrent, much worse, I dare say, than South Africa's? But South Africa was alienated completely. Why is the UN? This is one thing we could do. There's very little we can do, but one thing we can do is for the United Nations to practice what it preaches and throw out Iran and Saudi Arabia, but it won't. It instead elevates them. To put Iran on a women's rights council is beyond parody, parody. And any credibility that the UN might have had, it never had any with me, but it might have had with some, is completely gone.
So that is just a perfect segue to discussing this premise that has been introduced on this show. And it was introduced really through discussions on this show that led to me arriving at this conclusion that this verse, this parable in the book of Matthew, in which Jesus, talking about his return to earth, says, when the Son of Man comes in his glory, he will judge the nations. Now, what he says next is this separation of the sheep and goats into two different groups, and he says to the sheep, come ye blessed of the Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. You may remember having heard this as due to your Catholic upbringing. And then to the goats, he will say, depart from me, I never knew you. And this has always been applied at an individual level where people, say, oh, well, I must be kind. I must visit people in prison. I must give a glass of water to those who are thirsty. I must be just to those who are brought before the law in any way, shape, or form. And I must feed the hungry and so on, clothe the naked. But that's not what the parable is talking about. It literally says the nations will be judged. And so therefore, do the nations deliver those basic human rights or not? That is really the question. And so it came clear to me in terms of the prophetic timeline, which I'm not asking you to accept at all. Just look at it in terms of civilization and the arc of history. In 1948, after the Holocaust, when the Jewish state was established, you at the same time, in the same year, 1948, had the Universal Declaration of Human Rights established at the United Nations. Ergo, the nations had chosen the very standard by which they would be judged. And further in the book of Matthew, Jesus says, whatever standard of judgment you arrive at, I'm going to use that same standard of judgment to you. God will use that same standard of judgment. So again, whether you're religious or not, the nations will be judged by whether they adhere to that standard. And you've just eloquently pointed out how the nations are miserably failing to achieve and adhere to that standard. So what's next? What is the next step in the evolution of society and humanity?
That for me.
Yeah, I get it's a big question, and I know it's like what 3 a.m. and you've you're going on 2 hours sleep and 6 cups of coffee.
What's the next step? What I would like to see is a revival of democracy, an end to globalization, a restoration of restoration is not the right word because never really had it, but clarity of morality. I would like us to be clear as to. Oh, you've got your cat as well. Mine are. I've got 4 of them around me at the moment.
This is my daughter's cat, Licorice, who wants to get in on the action here.
I've got 4. So I want to see some moral clarity, some moral backbone. I would like to see our nation states restored, and democracy is an aspiration. Secularism is an aspiration. We will never get any of it perfect, but the victories are when you try to do it. This is when your society is built about what you try to do. You're never going to get everything right, but that's what I would like to see happen. The United Nations needs to go. I mean, I'm not sure what we would replace it with. I'm not against cooperation between countries, but it is morally bankrupt. And the comment has been left that all countries fail to live up to the UN standards to some extent. That's fine. And like I said, nothing's perfect. But when a body has a commitment to free speech, for example, around the world, and a commitment to equal rights between men and women, and then it allows a society like Iran to sit on a board. That's not just we're not perfect. That's complete opposition to what they pretend to preach. It's not about you didn't perfectly have freedom of speech this year. No one's perfect. But there's a big difference between not perfect and stoning people to death. There's a big gap between those two, and the UN is morally bankrupt. Most countries are actually morally bankrupt at this point, and we need a sort of a moral reset to go forward. And that means moral clarity. Is it wrong to torture people to death? Yes or no? If we decide it is wrong, well then let's stick to that and oppose torturing people to death consistently across the world. And those who won't get on board with it's wrong to torture people to death should be isolated and kept out of the government process globally.
Right, and we know how people will respond to that, right? Well, there was waterboarding of people at Guantanamo Bay, and therefore there's moral equivalency between a nation like the United States that has, under its auspices of its government, tortured people, and a nation where every day, hundreds of people are tortured for daring to violate some cultural taboo. Whereas at least the premise, I'm not even going to debate it, but the premise behind, what happened at Guantanamo Bay is, people who are guilty of colluding to murder thousands of people. And yes, if you do establish, and this is why it's hard, right? It's very easy. And this is something I've thought about for many years. It's very easy to attack the religious because they claim to adhere to a standard and they aspire to adhere to a standard that they themselves admit is unattainable, right? They themselves admit that the standard I am striving for is unattainable. And then they have to stand next to people who say there's no standard at all. And you can't judge me because anything I do is okay, versus I strive to attain to a standard that is unattainable. Now, which one are you going to call a hypocrite, right?
I call lots of people hypocrites. We're all hypocrites. Hypocrisy is
We are absolutely all hypocrites. I
Okay.
agree.
All right. You know what,
Daniel,
you guys,
please.
we're running behind. I'm going to just jump into another commercial. You guys will be right back.
Your story has the power to start a movement. Journalism is more than a tool for broadcasting news. It's an important way of fostering meaningful cultural relationships that create tangible change in our society. With our anthology Journalism Behind Bars, you can now do your part and make your mark. From expert writers to passionate amateur, everyone has a story to tell. Our aim is to promote equality, empathy, and create a safe space for different perspectives and interpretations of the world around us. Come join us today and break free from the toxic news cycle. By submitting your story to Journalism Behind Bars at info@soopllc.com.
I'm overruling you here, Dan. I'm going to go to segment 8. And so, Anne-Marie, we're going to now play another pre-recorded segment as we bring this thing home. And this was, we jumped over another segment on Islam. We're going to have you back to dive into that topic even more. But I want to now play this last clip, and then we'll talk about it.
History does show us that religious tolerance is a good thing, right? To be tolerant of other religions and have religious freedoms, that is something that indicates a progressive society, a civilized society. Anytime we've tried to shut down but I think what you're doing is with facts and bringing up and defending things in argumentation and pointing to the law. This means that you're participating in the discussion to show that it's wrong and that the norms need to change and that the majority needs to say, no, this is not okay for us. And no, we do not accept this. So you reform your religion.
Yeah,
we're not kicking you out, but you can't do that. That's not allowed. And if you do, you're going to be prosecuted under the law of this land. No exception. That's the way it is.
I would like that. I would like that very much. But the problem is you can't debate someone who won't admit facts. If I say this is a copy of the Quran, I've been here a million times. If we go back to just, for example, the wife beating verse, as I call it, I have had this debate so many times that people will simply say it's not there. And I'll say it is there. And they'll say it's not there. And they'll say it is there. And it's as if we act as if there's no way of knowing. When all we have to do is pick it up, open the page and say, look, there it is. But that doesn't happen. So you can't debate that. You can't debate people who are insisting that what's true isn't true. And I know that's what would happen with this guy. I know.
Is there an if around that? If your wife does, I'm not condoning it. I'm just curious. I'll look up the verse.
No,
just
if on her part you feel disobedient. It shouldn't even have to be. Before we even get to the disobedience part, she doesn't even have to be disobedient. You just have to fear that she may become disobedient. The first thing you have to do is ignore her.
She may become, okay. So
you fear disobedience. You have to, first of all, ignore her, which I'm sure will be terrible for her. The second one is stop sleeping with her, which I'm sure will also be a terrible punishment for her. And if she's still disobedient, beat her. That's what it says. And I'm told, one, it's not there. And when I pick it up and say, look, there it is, I'm told, yeah, but that can be interpreted in a million different ways. No, it can't. No, it can't. No, it can't. If you can interpret beat to mean cuddle, then there's no point in language. Language is just redundant. Beat means beat, cuddle means cuddle. They're two different things. We have a language to discern the difference between beat and cuddle. That's the point. That's the point of language. If we dismantle language, where are we? Nothing matters. Law is built around language. If you dismantle language, you dismantle law.
Yeah, and by a religious definition, the reason why they have the word and they have the Bible or the Quran is because that language is sacred and infallible. I don't think so. There's got to be a point where the religious leaders take responsibility for that and say, we live in a reality in this society now, a world that this is the world that we want to participate in. And either we're trying to create an us versus them to protect our own identity, which seems to me what the Muslim faith wants to do, off the record, because that's
what they want to do. That's okay. Yeah. Then just stay away from us. Yeah. And you know what? Millions of British people agree with me. As soon as they're allowed to speak, you'll hear that they agree. if you must insist like on living like that, okay, that's your prerogative. Just
So I'd like to take a
Like
moment.
the off the record that went on the record.
Yeah, well, Dan, you got a cop to that one. That was you.
Yeah,
So I want to take a moment to re-level set and then kind of get your concluding remarks for tonight, Anne Marie, and then we'll maybe look at a couple of comments from the audience as well to make sure that we give those books away. So I'm a Baha'i. John Piltz, who was here earlier, he's a Baha'i. The Baha'i faith teaches that there is a thing called progressive revelation. I'm also a fundamentalist, so I'm kind of a very weird Baha'i. I'm a fundamentalist in the sense that my religious training is to believe what I read in kind of a strange way. What you said, look, this is what the words say, and this is what they mean. Now, the foundations of Western civilization rely on, it's called the Judeo-Christian civilization, right? They rely on the words of the Old Testament and the New Testament. Now, for some strange reason, the Jews have found a way to, frankly, reinterpret their writings for the modern era, right? They have not, they do not advocate genocide today, though I could point to verses in the Old Testament where God is telling Israel to commit genocide. And it's justified. God is telling not the modern state of Israel. God is telling the ancient Israelites when they come out of Egypt and they enter the promised land to kill not just the soldiers, not just the women, not just the children, but every animal as well, right? So we'd have the animal rights activists up in arms over that one. But the Jews have found a way to reinterpret their writings for the modern era. Other religions, I was a Christian for many years. I was a Christian minister. I've studied into the original teachings of the New Testament and how I believe the church became corrupt, right? And Jesus consistently said, here's what was intended from the beginning, right? Which kind of goes back even before the writings of the Jewish scriptures. So, for example, the title of my second book, The Hardness of the Heart, comes from this test that was posed to Jesus about the matter of divorce. Moses said you could divorce your wife for any reason. It enters your mind, I want to divorce her. Just give her a bill of divorce and she's gone. And Jesus said, well, Moses allowed that because of the hardness of your heart, but from the beginning it was not so. In other words, that's clearly not the intent of God, right? So similarly with Islam, right? I would advocate that Islam has a role. I'm not saying that the religion of Islam should in some way be abolished. But in the modern era and with the benefit of enlightenment, the benefit of scientific study, the benefit of evidence and what works, you have to go back. You have to look at those scriptures. You have to reinterpret them. You do have to look at them in their cultural context to understand the intent. You have to look at, where was society at? Where were the tribes of Arabia at when the Quran was delivered? Well, they were literally burying their daughters in the sand. And some of the laws and rules in the Quran were to begin moving society at that time forward from what it was to what it needed to become. What I'm trying to do here is level set where we're going to go next. I want to talk for a moment about female genital mutilation. And you see in the comments, I'll go ahead and share this one. There is the Tahrir Justice Center and Layli Miller-Muro, who happens to be a Baha'i, but she addresses this issue of female genital mutilation. So this is a tip. It might be something worth looking into. She addresses it from the context of Islam, but I can already share what the Imam will say to this issue to kind of give you a heads up before we get to the wife beating verse. And that is that there's nothing in the Quran that in any way advocates female genital mutilation. And I believe that to be true. I believe that this
is not proof of the Hadith.
Right. I believe that this is something that has been introduced, frankly, from other cultures, right? This is baggage that is being brought in from other cultures in Africa that it's not in the Quran. So that's something that, the imam will address. The issue of the wife beating verse is going to be a different one, and that's going to be a more difficult discussion. And I believe let me stop there and just allow you to respond to that, because I don't mean to cut you off or not let you speak to it.
No, FGM isn't in the Quran, and it did exist before Islam. But Muhammad did sanction it, and Muhammad did advocate it in the Hadiths. Not everything has to be in the Quran to be Islamic. Now, the problem you've got, and we've seen it time and time again, is that when people try to fight FGM, try to get it stopped, the clerics will come back with, well, Muhammad did it. Therefore, you're insulting Muhammad by calling for an end of. You see this countless times. It's the same with child marriage. Child marriage isn't in the Quran, but Muhammad married Aisha when she was 6 and quote unquote consummated the marriage when she was 9. Now, for that reason, again, it's not in the Quran. But what Muhammad did is also part of Islam. The Quran is not the beginning and end of Islam. So when you see in Pakistan, for example, there were activists trying to get the law to crack down on child marriage, and a council of imams said, no, Muhammad did it. So that's the problem you've got. I mean, I'm not saying that other cultures don't have disgusting elements to them throughout history. But the problem you've got is that when it's sanctioned by Muhammad in Islam, it's so much harder to bring an end to it, because you're deemed to be insulting Islam if you dare to question the activities of Muhammad. And you can put it into a context of the time. That's fine. But that doesn't seem to wash with the clerics who have all the power, right?
Absolutely.
So you might say we can put it in a culture and context, fine. If we believe it's in a culture or a context of its time, fine. But the clerics who call the shots, they don't believe that, and that's the problem.
So thank you. I think what we'll do, and what I'm doing here is also, I mean, this is a live show, and we're thinking and acting as we go, right? And preparing for what's going to come next. I think what we're going to do here, we'll actually introduce some guests and start talking about this concept of progressive revelation, what it is and what it isn't, and how religion gets reformed or how it can get updated. But I want to take it now out of the context of religion and talk about another topic. We had Jason Persoff on, was it last week? Time flies. Talking about the pandemic, right? So not a religious topic at all, the pandemic, right? Here we have a situation where a global approach is being advocated and mandated by the powers that be, supposedly for the good of all, right? So you'll see how this has a similar, approach, outcome, context, whatever, to something like female genital mutilation or something like the rights of women. Anything that's in that Universal Declaration of Human Rights, right, by definition is a universal declaration. And if a global organization had the power, they would be wanting to enforce that. So you have an opportunity and a challenge of people on any side of one issue to look in the mirror and identify their own hypocrisy. And by that, I don't mean some evil, horrible, indelible stain of racism, but rather to look objectively and identify their own cognitive dissonance, right? Their own double standards and false equivalencies, right? So if you say that, some group of people or some majority decides we must stamp out female genital mutilation all over the world, and I know that's not necessarily your position, which is why I look forward to your response. But if we say we're going to stamp it out all over the world, then how do we resist that same body saying now we're going to force everybody on the planet to become vaccinated in order to stamp out this pandemic? Or we're going to force everybody on the world to submit to some kind of biochip so that we can track them in their activities and stamp out crime. Or we're going to force everyone to, adopt this digital currency that can be monitored so that we can stop human trafficking, right? How do we, these issues are all of a kind, right? Of a super authority that would deem how all of humanity must be managed.
But again, I mean, you're equating the forced forced medical procedure on the world's people against their will with stopping the mutilation of children. I don't see any equivalence between them. I don't want any global body to have the authority to forcefully subject us to medical treatments that we don't want and that we don't need. But I don't see that there's an equivalent in saying we must wipe out the mutilation of children around the world.
Then forget that one.
Or remotely comparable.
Take the wearing of a veil, which is perhaps a little bit more, because now you have an adult, and you might have women adults who agree with it, right? Who also, so you could have a majority of, let's say there was equality of men and women, and both the men and women said, yes, it's better in society that women are veiled, and now we have the power to begin enforcing that on other people.
When you say veiled, do you mean over the head or over the face?
What I'm getting at is the principle, the principle of insisting on a standard for all humanity and then enforcing that standard.
I'm not calling for a standard for all humanity, though. I'm calling for morals. Wearing a veil around your head is not really an immoral act.
By whose standard? Who determines what the morals are? How do we arrive at that?
We have it in us, Wade. We have an innate morality within us. Even the most fervently religious people, when they're blowing people up, deep down they know what they're doing is wrong, but they override that feeling because of religious instruction or political anger or whatever it may be. We have it in us. I believe humans are innately are born with a sense of right and wrong. So
do you believe that
does it cause death and objective suffering? And then it's wrong. Does it cause enslavement and torment for people? And we all know what that means. We all know what that means.
So do you believe then that
objectivity there?
Do you believe then that the Universal Declaration of Human Rights has gotten it approximately correct?
Pretty much. Yeah, I mean, it's aspirational. We're humans. We're always going to mess things up. We're always going to be hypocritical. We are all hypocrites. But we aspire. And in our aspiration, we make progress. That's the point. If we aspire to be good, we'll tend to do good acts in that aspiration. We won't be perfect. We won't always do good. But the aspiration is what makes us do good things on our journey. It's the same with democracy, and it's the same with the UN declarations. But the UN has lost its authority, not because I want it to impose a global standard, but you cannot say that you are against, that you are for freedom of speech or freedom of expression, and then allow somewhere like Saudi Arabia to sit on a board representing that rights, when Saudi Arabia, by law of the land, kills for what they express. This is, there's tiny little inconsistencies and wrongness where humans always will be, but that's too big to tolerate. Right. Sure.
So
our common sense
would you agree then? And I'm not trying to put words in your mouth. I'm just trying to clarify. Would you agree then that the United Nations, when it was established, and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, obviously it was aspirational, but was it inspirational, right? Was the world kind of excited about this at the time and wanted to do it and wanted to see it succeed? Did it inspire at that time? And has it since lost its ability to inspire because of its blatant, unbelievable hypocrisy?
I think it's lost its ability to. I'm not sure people were, perhaps Western countries were, because they were already on board. We know that a group of Islamic countries completely objected to it and came up with their own Sharia-compliant Declaration of Rights, which of course are not rights at all. So no, the whole world didn't respond well to it because large chunks of the world don't agree with the UN Declaration of Human Rights. Western countries, yes, I'm sure they agreed with it on paper because it was largely where Western democracies are coming from in the first place. But the world does not agree with it and still does not agree with it. And Muslim nations in particular didn't agree with it and said so and still say so.
So I'm going to throw out a tiny bit of history then for people, and then I'm going to invite you, Dan, to comment on this. Then we're going to go to one final commercial break about next week's show, and then we're going to come back and get your final words, Anne Marie, because I know you want to get to sleep because you have stuff you need to get to in the morning.
I don't think I will now.
After all that caffeine. So here's the tiny bit of history, right? The League of Nations was established under the direction of an American president, and I'm having a brain freeze on which one it was right now. But the Congress did not allow United States to join it. So the League of Nations was doomed to fail, even though the United States drove it and created it and brought it together. The United States didn't actually join it. Further, the indigenous nations of the United States had absolutely zero consideration or standing. When the United Nations was established much later, the United States did join that. And there was given some minor level of observant status or something. So there was a progression, and there are Native American prophecies that relate to the establishment of these things and the need for them to have representation on the stage of humanity. And so my point, and then we also had, of course, the 5 powers that have veto power, which are another reason why, nothing can actually get decided and accomplished, because there's always one bad actor who's going to not let it happen and not actually submit their own authority to the joint decision, which to me is not to say that we should not have national sovereignty. We should absolutely preserve and retain national sovereignty, except that which the nation agrees to give up. Right? Agrees to give up, and we need to protect and maintain that sovereignty. The United States is a relatively decent model of that's worked for a while. It's under stress right now, but that's why in our nation we have the so-called sovereign state of Texas, right? It's always Texas that claims that sovereignty. They all, in fact, have it, right? But Dan, your thoughts on any of this right before we go to commercial break?
I've been spending a lot of time on property rights and where they came from with John Locke, and been working on something called the metaphysics of ownership, of property ownership. And I think what I've been able to come up with is that you create a mine and a yours with the ownership of property, right? And this is fundamental to civilized society. Now, this us versus them, if it's being defined by nations, that means certain nations get certain things and certain nations don't get certain things, right? And how do we decide that? Well, that's up to the nations to decide that if we're defining things at the nation state. If we don't define things at the nation state, then we become a homogeneous sort of like, it's unrecognizable. And it seems like this is the hope of the neoliberal order and globalization, is to take all the benefits about multiculturalism, but unfortunately there's a downside to the pluralistic sort of homogenization of cultures across the world. And I think that's what Anne Marie is doing. She's trying to stand up and say that a relatively new culture that isn't defined, that isn't identified, I'm standing up and I'm yelling and screaming, I'm identifying this as a culture and we're protective, so back off. That's what's kind of going on there, right? And I think it's I would say, do you say it's valid or not? Well, I mean, actually, I really wasn't thinking it as an ultimate truth claim. I think it's actually an identity claim. It's a claim for culture. This is how we like to live. This is how we like to identify ourselves as. And now we want to put that idea forward, dogma forward.
Why would some get to elevate their identity claim above the identity claims of everybody else?
Well, that's the thing. And it seems like the relatively new countries allow more of that type of thing. There's less history in America or in Canada than there is in Europe, for example.
I would submit it has less to do with history, and it has more to do with the, generosity of spirit, which again, immediately somebody will come out and say, no, you guys are racist. It's xenophobic. No, it's the generosity of spirit that has allowed the erosion of that identity. It's the desire for multiculturalism that has allowed the erosion of that identity to the point where some people are saying, hey, wait a minute, this has gone too far. And now they want to preserve their identity. And then they're, to your point, Anne-Marie, they're being declared to be racists for doing so when everybody else gets to do it to even a greater degree.
Only white people. You see, white Europeans are not allowed to have their culture or identity. Everyone else in the world is, but white people are not. And this
let me give you a moment to gather your thoughts on that topic. We're going to go to commercial break, and then when we come back, we'll let you have the final word. And if you see a comment out there that you like the best, you'll get to award your book. But I want to announce that this ad that we're about to play is for next week's guest. We're going to have a PhD in human relations, working in many major corporations within the U.S. with another fellow author. Talking about the loss of her mother, a book she wrote, and the grieving process. So we'll play that ad, and then we'll come back, Anne-Marie, and get to hear you wrap it up for us. Over to you.
Oh, I will answer one of the questions in the comments, if that's okay.
Perfect.
It came in quite early. What's wrong with people using their cultural dress in Britain? Isn't it a separate issue? Now, that's actually a really important question, because it gives me a chance to clarify that this isn't about making us all the same. That's not what I am aspiring to at all. I like color. I like variety. I think the existence of nation states gives the world variety and color, and it's interesting, and it's good to mix with other people and learn from their experience and their perspective. But if we talk about cultural dress in Britain, I've no problem with people dressing however they like in Britain. What the issue is covering the face. And this is only one group of people is permitted to cover their face in this country, and that is Muslims who wear a niqab. That is wrong, and that is wrong for a few reasons. One, because the niqab is dehumanizing to women objectively, and two, it elevates Islam above the rest of us because only Muslims are allowed to do it. And three, it renders our law meaningless. We're not one law for all. If I'm not allowed to wear a black cover over my face, other people shouldn't be able to either. I'm not calling for uniformity. I'm not calling for sameness. I'm calling for a moral clarity, as clear as we can get it as human beings, that torture and torment and enslavement is wrong, and it is wrong under the guise of religion just as much as it is under the guise of atheism. I'm the good guy. I want people to be free. I want people to be happy. I want us to make the most of our lives as best we can. But we have got to have a clarity, and those about what is moral and what isn't, and those who don't agree, those who will object to a prohibition on killing or enslaving, shouldn't actually be allowed into the conversation when we are talking about how to structure society in a way that doesn't allow for willy-nilly killing and enslaving.
So,
and also, just quick note on secularism, if I may. We talk about interpretation and different we debate the meaning of words in religious scriptures. That to me is, as I said to Daniel last week, is why it cannot be the basis of legislation. If we take the Quran, for example, people don't agree what one verse says, then how can you impose that verse if even within the faith nobody agrees what it's actually saying? We've got to base our society. Philosophy, if you want to live your personal life, I live by a spiritual philosophy. It's mine and it's private to me. That is essentially what I see the role of religion as taking, a personal philosophy. But if we are all to be free, then we must agree a moral standard that we are all held to, regardless of what our religion teaches. And that must be enforced by law, because one of the great paradoxes of life, of course, is there must be law and order in order for us to be free. There must be rules in order for us to be free. And that's where I'm coming from.
I'm reminded of several of the great prophets of your nation: John Cleese, Michael Palin, Eric Idle, and their famous movie, The Life of Brian,
Great
where
film.
it's the gourd versus the sandal, right? And you have a faction forming because one of them received the gourd that he handed off, while another one picked up the sandal that had fallen off his foot, right? And your point about words, words have split entire denominations into competing factions. Interpretation of whether, I won't go there because I said we're not really here to discuss theology, but rather the outcome of that. So, as an attorney, you recognize that in law people fight over words too, but those laws get to be defined, and then those words have that meaning.
Yeah.
And you don't have suddenly a separate legal system being erected, which is to your point about Sharia law in Great Britain. What on this particular topic, and I guess we'll conclude with this thought, we have several experts planned for future shows, experts in religious freedom, because I hear you and I agree with you. And at the same time, as a person of faith and religion here in the United States, I'm grateful that I have certain rights that allow me, frankly, to be treated differently under the law in America, right? So one of the great debates, again, getting back to the pandemic, was why were churches singled out? Why were churches singled out more?
You know the answer to that.
Well, it's
the answer to that.
Well, but isn't it because there are those who would like to see the erosion of freedom of religion?
No, freedom of Christians. You won't see the same people calling for mosques to be closed because they see Christianity as Western, and they're attacking.
But again, where that, and we might say that might be because certain Islamists are playing the long game, right? They'd like to see this destroyed, but then they can reemerge and take over and establish themselves. But those who are facilitating that erosion are in fact wanting there not to be, any religious exemptions. You follow me? It's not that they want society to become governed by Sharia law, right? It's that they're fighting a common enemy.
Well, some people want society to be governed by Sharia law, but it isn't the Muslims who single out the churches to close them down. It's again, I use it only for simplicity.
But my point is, aside from that, what should the law be in this regard? Because to your point, you can't have your cake and eat it too. You can't logically outlaw one religion and encourage another.
I'm not calling for any religion to be outlawed. I'm calling for religions to be subject to a law that is decided between us all democratically. And I'm not, and just to be clear as well, I'm a secularist, but I'm a moderate secularist. I understand, for example, with this country, I don't want to see the Church of England disestablished, because the Church of England is part of the fabric and heritage of this country. I still find it strange to say the King. The King is head of the Church of England. I wouldn't have it any other way. That's not really the point. That's heritage. I'm not calling for religions to be banned. I've never said anything of the kind.
No,
I'm
and
calling for them to be subject to a law that is applied to everyone equally. And if your religion clashes with that law, then I'm afraid it's your religion that has to change, not the law.
And this will, I look so forward to continue this conversation. Hopefully we'll be able to find a time to pre-record, or you'll be willing to stay up all night again to have that fascinating discussion. As we move forward with those experts, I'd love to have the British perspective when we have these experts who are university professors, studying religious law here in the United States, where we have this concept of freedom of religion. In a way that's, England has it too, but we have it under slightly different legal, foundations. So I don't know how to thank you enough for staying up all night, for coming onto this show. And we will be having Imam Mekye back to address some of the questions you've raised. We're going to allow him also the time to do so in the manner we've allowed you tonight. And it is our hope that we will also get the two of you together to really, have an honest discussion about this that might result in you or he, shifting your attitude slightly or not. But in any case, presenting perspectives that the audience can then learn from, whether they're learning from you, whether they're learning from him, whether they're reshaping or forming their attitudes and their opinions in that aspirational way that you spoke to. Because I agree with you, we all have the capacity to recognize good and evil, right? I believe we were given that in the first verses of the book of Genesis, where we were told, not to take of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And yet there was this little serpent placed in that same garden that said, go ahead and eat it. Right. So it's a fascinating story and a fascinating concept. Paul the apostle in the New Testament later said that strong meat, in other words, the things that are challenging for us, belong or are needed by those who by reason of use have exercised their senses to discern good and evil. So he refers back to that tree and says, we're all eating of that tree and we're using our senses to discern good and evil. Maybe in some theoretical universe, we would not have eaten it and we would have all been automatons, robots doing God's will. But that was obviously never God's intent. The intent was, chew it, swallow it, choke on it, but figure it out. Figure it out.
Fair enough. I'm not sure morality did come from the Bible, but you and I will disagree on that one. I think we've been around for 200,000 years. I think we had morals prior to the Bible, and I think also our innate morals allow us to pick bits from the Bible we agree with. So it's sort of circular. How can we pick things from the Bible and dismiss others if we get our morality from the Bible? We are using our morality to pick and choose from the Bible in the first place. So the morality has to have been there before the Bible. But that's interesting debate.
That may be an interesting topic for another show in the middle of the night. But I really do want to let you go now, Anne-Marie, and thank you again so much. I know that our audience has enjoyed it. Was there a particular comment or question that jumped out at you that you'd like to award a copy of your book?
I'll give it to the lady I think it was a lady, about cultural dress in Britain, because it's the question that caught my eye and I wanted to answer.
A.M. Sterling, reach out to info@soopllc.com with your mailing address. You are the proud winner of Anne-Marie Waters' book, Beyond Terror, the Islam's Slow Erosion of Western Democracy. And if you'd rather have her second book on, what was the title of that one? Refresh my memory. In Defense of Democracy, right? Take your pick. Reach out to us and we'll have that book shipped to you post haste. Anne-Marie, thank you. We will have you back and can't wait. Good night, everyone.